My name is Leo Maxwell. I am 34 years old, and for the past 2 years, my life had achieved a state of what I called functional equilibrium. It was a carefully constructed peace, built on routine and the quiet hum of predictability. I was the operations supervisor for a mid-sized logistics firm, a title that sounded more impressive than the reality of ensuring several metric tons of other people's stuff got from point A to point B without incident. It was a world of spreadsheets, pallet jacks, and the satisfying scent of cardboard and diesel fuel. I was good at it. I was competent. And in the silent, orderly kingdom of my warehouse, competence was currency. This equilibrium had been a conscious choice, a strategic retreat. My last significant relationship, a 5-year cohabitation with a woman named Sarah, had dissolved not with a bang, but with a weary sigh. She had packed her things on a Sunday afternoon while I was meticulously organizing the spice rack, a task she'd been asking me to do for months. The irony was not lost on me. "It's not you, Leo," she'd said, which was, of course, the universal prelude to "it is entirely you," she'd continued, her voice soft with a pity I found more insulting than anger. "You're just settled. You're safe. I feel like I'm watching my life on a pre-recorded schedule, and I need a live broadcast." She had wanted spontaneity, chaotic weekend trips, and arguments fueled by passion instead of disagreements over the correct way to load a dishwasher. I offered stability, a well-funded 401k, and a partner who would always remember to take the trash out on Tuesday nights. In the marketplace of modern romance, I had become a savings bond in a world trading in cryptocurrency. So, she left in search of a life with more volatile returns. I didn't blame her, but I did learn from it. I learned that my brand of quiet reliability, the very thing that made me excellent at my job, was a liability in love. So I stopped trying to sell it. I doubled down on the quiet, on the predictable. My life became my work, my small apartment, and the comfortable silence in between. Then Clara happened. Or rather, Clara had been happening in the periphery for a while. She was Clara Maxwell. No, not that Maxwell. My Maxwell was a coincidence. Her Maxwell was the one emblazoned on the side of every truck in my fleet and on the letterhead of every soul-crushing memo from corporate. She was the boss's daughter, not the intern-fetching coffee type of boss's daughter. She was the Wharton MBA, sharks for eyeballs, terrifyingly intelligent type of boss's daughter who had been installed in the finance department 6 months ago to learn the business from the ground up. Most of us on the floor figured that was code for find out who's stealing pens. My initial observations of her were conducted from a safe distance, the way one observes a beautiful but potentially venomous snake. She moved through the corporate offices with a focused grace that was entirely at odds with the building's drab, gray-carpeted aesthetic. She wasn't conventionally beautiful in the way of magazine covers. Her features were too sharp for that, her expression too serious. But there was a potency to her, an intensity in the way she'd listen in meetings, her dark eyes missing nothing. She had a habit of tucking a strand of dark brown hair behind her ear that seemed to be the only unplanned gesture she ever made. I found myself cataloging these small details, filing them away in a part of my brain I'd long since decommissioned. The first anomaly occurred 3 months ago. Payday. I'm a creature of habit. I check my pay stub online the moment it posts, not out of anxiety, but as part of the ritual. I noted the federal taxes, the state taxes, the 401k contribution, the health insurance deduction. And I paused. The net deposit was wrong. It was high, by exactly $450. I blinked, refreshed the page. Still there. A clerical error, I assumed. A happy one, but an error nonetheless. I made a mental note to email Human Resources on Monday, then promptly used the extra funds to buy the ridiculously overpriced Japanese whetstone I'd been wanting for my kitchen knives. The email was never sent. A month later, it happened again. Another payday, another deposit. This time, the overage was $462.50. The specificity was unnerving. This wasn't a typo. It felt deliberate. My heart hammered a slightly faster rhythm against my ribs. This was no longer a happy accident. This was a mystery. I started to get paranoid. Was this a test? A bizarre corporate integrity audit? Was someone trying to frame me for financial misconduct? My mind, usually a calm sea of logistical planning, became a roiling ocean of conspiracy. My friend Marcus, who ran the receiving dock, told me I was an idiot. "Shut up and take the money, Leo," he grunted, heaving a box of widgets onto a pallet. God knows they don't pay you enough for the crap you put up with. He was right, but the unease lingered. The third month was the breaking point. The deposit hit my account at midnight. I was awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it. The number that appeared on my phone screen was, once again, incorrect. $462.50. The exact same amount as the previous month. It was a pattern. It was intentional. My quiet, predictable world was being systematically invaded by an anonymous, benevolent financial entity. It was terrifying. The next morning, an email sat in my inbox. The sender's name made my stomach clench. Clara Maxwell. The subject line was a single, devastatingly simple word: dinner. My finger hovered over the delete button. My entire being, every self-preservation instinct honed by the great Sarah Exodus, screamed at me to ignore it. This was the opposite of equilibrium. This was a grenade, and the pin was an invitation to an Italian restaurant. But then I read the body of the email. It was as concise and direct as I imagined she was. "Leo," it read, "I imagine you have some questions about your recent pay statements. I have some answers. Let me buy you dinner tonight to explain. Franco's, 7:30. My treat. It's the least I can do." It was a confession, a summons, a threat, and a promise all rolled into one. I stared at the words, my mind a blank slate. She knew. She was the ghost in my machine, the source of my phantom income. And now she wanted to explain. My curiosity, a muscle I hadn't flexed in years, finally overpowered my caution. I typed a single-word reply, my finger hitting the key with a sense of grim finality. Okay. The rest of the day passed in a fog of low-grade panic. I walked the warehouse floor, my usual confident stride replaced with the hesitant shuffle of a man walking to his own execution. The familiar roar of the forklifts and the rhythmic thud of boxes on conveyor belts did nothing to soothe me. Every shadow looked like her father, Mr. Maxwell Sr., lurking with a pink slip. Every whisper from the packing line sounded like my name. Marcus saw me staring blankly at a shipping manifest. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "Worse," I muttered. "I'm having dinner with one." Franco's was the kind of place Sarah would have called aggressively authentic, dim lighting, checkered tablecloths, and a waiter who looked like he'd been personally offended by my choice of a simple button-down shirt. I arrived at 7:25, a slave to my own punctuality. The hostess led me to a small booth in the back, the red leather worn smooth over the years. I slid in, the vinyl cool against my back, and immediately felt overdressed and underprepared. She arrived at exactly 7:30. I watched her cross the room, and for the first time, I saw her outside the context of the office. She wore a simple black dress that made her look less like a corporate shark and more like, well, a woman on her way to dinner. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She still had that serious, focused expression, but as she spotted me, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. My heart did a stupid, inconvenient little flip. "Leo," she said, sliding into the booth opposite me. Her voice was lower, softer than it was in the boardroom. "Thanks for coming. You said you had answers." I replied, my own voice sounding rustier than I'd intended. "And that it was your treat." It was a compelling offer. That small smile widened, just a fraction. I'm a fan of compelling offers. She picked up her menu, the movement fluid and efficient. "I hope you like Italian." "It's hard to dislike bread, cheese, and wine," I said, trying to sound more relaxed than I felt. My palms were sweating. The waiter reappeared, his disdain for me seemingly forgotten now that he was in Clara's presence. He fawned over her, recommending specials with a thick, theatrical accent. She listened patiently, then ordered a bottle of Chianti with a confidence that made me feel like I'd just learned how to use a fork. She looked at me, her dark eyes analytical. "Is that okay?" I just nodded, feeling mute. Who was I to argue with a woman who could manipulate payroll and summon vintage wines with a single sentence? Once the waiter was gone, a silence settled over the table. It wasn't awkward exactly. It was heavy. It was the silence of two people who both knew exactly why they were there, but were waiting for the other to say it first. I decided to get it over with. It was my paycheck after all. So, I began clearing my throat. My paycheck. Clara leaned forward, her hands resting on the table. She didn't fidget. She was perfectly still, a picture of composure. Yes, your paycheck. It's been generous. Lately. Has it? She asked, a hint of amusement in her tone. It wasn't mocking. It was something else. It was like she was enjoying this. $450 the first month. $462.50 the next two. I'm not an accountant, but I noticed a trend. She finally broke her composure and let out a small laugh. It was a surprising sound, like a bell ringing in a library. You're not an accountant, she repeated softly. No, you're the man who single-handedly redesigned the entire outbound staging process, cutting our average load time by 15% and reducing shipping errors by a full point. You're the man who jury-rigged the main conveyor belt with apart from a broken-down forklift during the Christmas rush last year, saving us from a catastrophic backlog that would have cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're the man who knows the name of every single person on your team, their kids' names, and when their wedding anniversaries are. But no, you are not an accountant. I stared at her, my mouth slightly agape. I had no idea she knew any of that. The conveyor belt incident was a frantic, greasy 3-hour affair I thought had gone completely unnoticed by the front office. The staging process redesign was something I'd implemented over a weekend because the old system was inefficient and it bothered me. It was just what I did. How do you know all that? I managed to ask. The wine arrived, and she waited patiently while the waiter went through the ritual of pouring a small amount for her to taste. She swirled it, sniffed it, and nodded her approval. The man looked like he'd just been knighted. Once he was gone, she filled my glass, then her own. I read, she said simply. I read reports, the ones nobody else does. Weekly efficiency summaries, maintenance logs, overtime authorizations. It's all there in black and white. Your name is everywhere, Leo. Not in the headlines, but in the margins. You're the footnote that explains why everything else is working. You're the reason the numbers on the big, flashy sales reports even exist. I took a large gulp of wine. It was rich and earthy, and it did absolutely nothing to calm the frantic hummingbird that had taken up residence in my chest. Okay, I said, setting the glass down with a bit too much force. So you've been reading my mail. Why have you been paying me? Because you're being robbed, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Not by a guy in a ski mask, by a line item in a budget. By institutional inertia, she took a sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving mine. When my father hired you 6 years ago, he put you in a salary bracket for a warehouse foreman. That's what the title was. But your job has evolved. The company has tripled in size. You're not a foreman, Leo. You're an operations supervisor managing a multi-million-dollar logistics hub. But your pay grade? It never evolved with you. You got the standard 3% cost of living increase every year, just like everyone else. No one ever bothered to reevaluate your actual value to this company. I was speechless. She was right. I knew she was right. I'd felt it for years, a low-level resentment simmering just below the surface. But I was the quiet, reliable guy. I didn't make waves. I just did the work. I had assumed that was enough. I noticed a discrepancy about 2 months after I started. She continued. I ran a salary analysis against industry benchmarks for your role in our region. You were being underpaid by roughly 35%. 35%. The number hung in the air between us. It was a car. It was a down payment on a house. It was 5 years of Sarah telling me we couldn't afford the vacation she wanted. So I tried to fix it the right way, she said, making air quotes with her fingers. I went to HR. I went to the CFO. Do you know what they said? I shook my head, my throat suddenly dry. They said, if we adjust his salary, we have to reevaluate everyone. It will open a Pandora's box, they said. Does he even know he's underpaid? Has he complained? They said, it's not in the budget for this quarter, Her voice was laced with a contempt that was almost beautiful. They treated a man's worth like a rounding error. They were more concerned with bureaucratic tidiness than with basic fairness. "So you took matters into your own hands?" I whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place. "I have a certain level of discretionary budget authority," she said with a shrug, though the fire in her eyes told me it was more than that. "I found a loophole, a consulting and materials expenditure fund that has almost no oversight. I've been coding your bonus as a specialized logistics consulting fee. It was the only way I could get you the money you'd earned without setting off a dozen alarms and getting bogged down in red tape for 6 months. The initial $450 was a test to see if the coding would go through. The $462.50 is 1/12 of the annual shortfall, plus a little extra for interest. I was back paying you." I leaned back in the booth, the leather creaking in protest. It wasn't a test. It wasn't a trap. It was justice. A clandestine, Robin Hood-esque form of justice executed through the labyrinthine tunnels of corporate finance. And this woman, this intense, brilliant woman, was the architect. "Why?" I asked, the question coming out softer than I intended. "Why go to all that trouble for me?" Clara put her wine glass down and looked at me. Really looked at me. It was the kind of look that made you feel like she was seeing the atomic structure of your soul. "Because I hate inefficiency," she said, the corner of her mouth twitching. "And letting your most valuable asset feel undervalued is the most inefficient thing a company can do." She paused, and her expression softened. "And because it was the right thing to do. My father built this company on the idea that good work should be rewarded. Somewhere along the way, the bureaucracy forgot that. I'm just reminding it. We ordered food. I don't remember what I ate. I think it was pasta. All I could focus on was the woman across from me. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not just looked at, but truly, fundamentally seen. Sarah had seen my stability as a cage. Clara saw it as a foundation. She saw the quiet work I did in the shadows, and, instead of ignoring it, she had stepped out of the light to come and stand beside me. The conversation flowed easily after that. We talked about the company, about her ideas for it, about my own quiet frustrations and ambitions. She listened with that same focused intensity, asking sharp, insightful questions that made me think about my own job in ways I hadn't before. She had a dry, wicked sense of humor that came out in flashes, catching me off guard and making me laugh. A real, genuine laugh that felt foreign in my own chest. As we were waiting for the check, a voice cut through our bubble. Well, Clara, I didn't realize you were slumming it tonight." I looked up. Standing over our table was a man who looked like he'd been assembled from a kit labeled generic corporate douchebag. He was tall, with perfectly coiffed hair, a designer suit that probably cost more than my rent, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I recognized him from the sales department. Julian Vance. He was one of their top guys, known for his aggressive tactics and his even more aggressive cologne. Clara's face went rigid. The warmth that had been there moments before vanished, replaced by a cool, polite mask. "Julian," she said, her voice flat. "What a surprise. I was just closing a deal at the bar," he said, gesturing vaguely behind him. His eyes flicked to me, a dismissive up-and-down glance that took in my off-the-rack shirt and my general lack of polish. He didn't recognize me. To him, I was just some guy. "Didn't take you for a fan of the checkered tablecloth scene. And who's your friend?" The word friend was loaded with condescension. "This is Leo Maxwell," Clara said, her tone daring him to make a comment. "Leo, this is Julian Vance. He works in sales." She delivered the last line with the same enthusiasm one might use to say he has a minor fungal infection. Julian's slick smile faltered for a second. He clearly hadn't made the connection between the name and the warehouse guy. He extended a hand to me, his grip predictably firm and overbearing. "Maxwell, huh? Any relation?" he asked, nodding towards Clara. "Only by a shared appreciation for logistical efficiency," I said, my voice calm. I didn't try to match his grip. I just met it. Julian's eyes narrowed slightly. That wasn't the answer he was expecting. He turned his attention back to Clara, draping an arm over the back of her side of the booth. It was a proprietary, invasive gesture, I felt a hot spike of anger, an emotion I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Listen, I'm heading over to the aviary for a drink with the team. You should come, he said, his voice dropping into a faux intimate tone. Ditch this place and have some real fun. He looked at me again. You can come too, I guess. Someone's got to drive you home. The implication was clear. I was the chauffeur, the help, a temporary amusement before she returned to her own world, a world he belonged in and I didn't. I saw Clara open her mouth to respond, a storm gathering in her eyes. But before she could unleash the hurricane I knew was coming, I spoke. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the table, and met Julian's gaze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The years I'd spent managing rough-and-tumble dock workers had taught me that the quietest man in the room is often the most listened to. That's a very generous offer, Julian, I said, my voice even and mild. But I think we'll pass. You see, Claire and I are in the middle of a rather complex discussion about asset valuation and resource allocation. It's probably a bit dry for a sales guy. Lots of spreadsheets, not a lot of steak dinners. I paused, letting the silence hang for a beat. Besides, I added, looking at Clara with a small, private smile, we haven't had dessert yet. Julian stared at me. His brain, clearly programmed for a world of loud comebacks and aggressive posturing, seemed to be short-circuiting. He couldn't compute this quiet, polite dismissal. He looked from me to Clara, searching for an ally, and found none. Her expression was one of barely concealed delight. He finally removed his arm from the booth, his posture stiffening. Your loss, he grumbled, the slick veneer cracking to reveal the petty entitlement beneath. He shot me one last dirty look before turning and striding away, his expensive suit radiating indignation. The moment he was gone, the tension at the table broke. Clara let out a long breath, and then, to my utter shock, she started to laugh. Not the small, polite laugh from before. This was a full, throaty, wonderful laugh that made her eyes sparkle. Oh my God, she said, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. Asset valuation and resource allocation? That was brutal. You just called him a simple-minded carnivore in corporate speak. He seemed like the kind of guy who's more comfortable with a PowerPoint presentation than an actual conversation, I said, a grin spreading across my own face. I thought I'd speak his language. She was still smiling, but her expression had changed. She was looking at me again with that intense, analytical gaze, but this time it was different. It was warmer. It was filled with something that looked suspiciously like admiration. That's what I was talking about, she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Most men would have gotten angry. They would have puffed out their chests, maybe said something stupid. They would have tried to match his energy. She shook her head, a look of wonder on her face. You didn't. You just waited, you processed, and you dismantled him with a single, perfectly chosen sentence. You didn't even break a sweat. And there it was, the moment of being seen. Sarah had called me boring because I didn't have big, fiery reactions. She saw my calm as a lack of passion. But Clara saw it as a strength. She saw the thought behind the silence. She saw the precision in the restraint. She looked at the very same quality that had ended my last relationship and called it a virtue. The waiter brought the check, along with a small plate of biscotti. Clara placed her credit card on the tray, without looking at the bill. Thank you, Leo, she said, her voice serious now. For what? I asked, confused. You're the one who bought dinner, and you're the one who's been secretly padding my bank account. For the dinner conversation, she said, and for handling Julian. It was nice, for a change, not to have to be the one to do it. I thought about that, about the constant vigilance it must take to be her, the boss's daughter, a smart, capable woman in a world of Julians who saw her as a prize to be won or a connection to be exploited. I suddenly understood that her composure wasn't a lack of feeling. It was a suit of armor. And tonight, I had, in a small way, helped her carry its weight. Any time, I said, and I meant it. We walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. The silence between us was comfortable now, filled with the unspoken events of the evening. So, I said, breaking the quiet as we reached the corner where we would have to part ways. My paycheck. What happens now? She stopped and turned to face me, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. That one unplanned gesture. Well, she said, a playful glint in her eye. I suppose my father would be very interested to hear about a 35% payroll discrepancy in one of his key departments. I imagine a formal salary review and a significant amount of back pay could be expedited if the right person were to bring it to his attention. The right person? Me, she said simply. I'll handle on Monday. The right way this time. No more secret consulting fees. Oh, I said, a wave of relief and something else, disappointment, washing over me. So this was it. The mystery was solved. The debt was settled. Our transaction was complete. Well, thank you for everything. You're welcome, she said. She hesitated for a moment, and for the first time all night, she looked uncertain. The thing is, Leo, she started, then stopped. She took a small breath. The dinner wasn't just about the paycheck. My heart, which had just begun to slow to its normal, placid rhythm, kicked back into high gear. It wasn't. No, she said, her gaze direct and unwavering. The paycheck was the excuse. I told you. I read the reports. I see the work you do. I see how you think. And I was curious. I wanted to see if the man in the margins was as interesting as the data suggested he was. And I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The data, she said, a slow smile spreading across her face, doesn't do you justice. She held my gaze for a long moment, the sounds of the city fading into a distant hum. Then she did something that completely short-circuited my carefully rebuilt defenses. She reached out, her fingers brushing against my hand. It was a fleeting touch, barely there, but it sent a jolt of electricity straight through me. I should go, she said, her voice a little breathless. I have an early meeting. Right. Me too. Spreadsheets, I said, feeling like an idiot. She smiled again, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes and made them shine. Good night, Leo. Good night, Clara. I watched her walk away, her figure receding down the street until she turned a corner and was gone. I stood there on the sidewalk for a long time, the cool night air doing nothing to cool the heat in my cheeks. My hand still tingled where she had touched it. For 2 years, my life had been a closed loop, a predictable orbit around a star that had long since gone out. Tonight, a comet had just torn through the middle of it, and I had a sinking, terrifying, exhilarating feeling that my carefully constructed equilibrium was about to be shattered for good. I found, to my own surprise, that I couldn't wait. The following Monday was surreal. I walked into the warehouse, and everything was the same, yet nothing was. The scent of coffee and cardboard was the same. The rumble of the trucks in the bay was the same. Marcus was still complaining about the quality of the new packing tape. But I was different. A part of my brain was no longer calculating palette configurations. It was replaying the way Clara's eyes had sparkled when she laughed. I spent the morning in a state of heightened awareness, my ears tuned to the sound of approaching footsteps in hard-soled shoes. I was half expecting her to appear at my office door, or for her father to summon me for a very uncomfortable conversation. But the morning passed with nothing but the usual cascade of minor emergencies. A mislabeled shipment to Des Moines, a forklift with a hydraulic leak, a new guy who couldn't figure out how to use the scanner gun. It was business as usual. Around noon, an email pinged in my inbox. It was from HR. The subject line was salary review. My heart did a nervous tap dance against my ribs. I clicked it open. It was a formal notification. My position had been officially reclassified from warehouse foreman to director of operations. The email detailed a new salary effective immediately that was exactly 35% higher than my old one. It also mentioned that a one-time bonus for past performance and retroactive compensation would be included in my next paycheck. I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face. She was a woman of her word. She hadn't just fixed the problem. She had rewritten the rules. Director of Operations. It had a nice ring to it. Sarah had once told me I wasn't going anywhere. I wondered what she would think of this. The thought was fleeting, and for the first time, it wasn't tinged with bitterness. It was just a data point from a past I was rapidly moving beyond. The real test came later that week. The company had a quarterly all-hands meeting, a mandatory gathering where the department heads presented their results, and Mr. Maxwell Sr. gave a speech that was equal parts inspiring and intimidating. Usually, I stood in the back with my team, half listening and mentally planning the evening's truck-loading schedule. This time was different. As I walked into the large conference room, I saw Julian Vance holding court near the coffee station. He was surrounded by his usual clique of sales guys, laughing loudly at something one of them had said. He saw me enter, and his smile tightened. He hadn't forgotten our encounter at Franco's. He said something to his friends, and they all turned to look at me, their expressions ranging from amusement to contempt. The air grew thick with their unspoken judgment. The warehouse guy in his slightly too stiff company polo shirt, out of his depth in the carpeted world of the front office. Old Leo would have found a spot in the furthest corner of the room and tried to become invisible. Old Leo would have let their condescension wash over him, another unpleasant but unavoidable part of life. But I wasn't old Leo anymore. I was the man who had dismantled Julian with a sentence. I was the man Clara Maxwell had sought out. I met Julian's gaze, gave him a small, polite nod that was somehow more insulting than ignoring him, and walked directly toward the front of the room where the department heads were sitting. I saw Clara sitting next to her father. She was wearing a sharp navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in a professional chignon. She looked formidable and untouchable. She saw me approaching, and a flicker of something passed through her eyes. Surprise? Apprehension. I didn't stop at the chairs. I walked right up to her. Clara, I said, my voice low and for her ears only. I got the email from HR, Director of Operations. Thank you. A slow smile bloomed on her face, transforming her severe, professional expression into something warm and radiant. Don't thank me, she murmured back. You earned it. I just did the paperwork. From the corner of my eye, I could see Julian and his cronies staring, their jaws practically on the floor. Her father, Mr. Maxwell, a formidable man with a stern face and shrewd eyes, was also watching us, his expression unreadable. Still, I said, I owe you. Another dinner, maybe? My treat this time. As Director of Operations, I think I can finally afford it. Her smile widened. I think, she said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper, that I would like that very much. It was at that moment that Julian decided to make his move. He strode toward us, his face a mask of false bonhomie. Clara, Dad was just asking for you, he said, completely ignoring me. It was a blatant attempt to reassert his place, to pull her back into his orbit and remind everyone in the room of her status and my lack thereof. But Clara didn't move. She didn't even look at him. She kept her eyes on me. My father knows where I am, Julian, she said, her voice cool and sharp as glass. And I'm currently in the middle of a conversation with my new Director of Operations. The public declaration, the casual way she said, my new director, hung in the air like a thunderclap. It was a shield, a statement. She was publicly aligning herself with me. She was drawing a line in the sand, and Julian was on the wrong side of it. He flushed a deep, ugly red. He had tried to undermine me, to isolate me, and instead he had only succeeded in getting himself publicly rebuked by the one person he was trying to impress. He stammered something about a misunderstanding and beat a hasty retreat back to the coffee station, the laughter of his friends conspicuously absent. Mr. Maxwell stood up and began the meeting, but I didn't hear the first 10 minutes. All I could feel was the warmth of Clara's gaze, the silent, powerful statement she had just made on my behalf. It was more than just defending me. It was championing me. In that moment, in front of the entire company, she had taken a stand. She had chosen the quiet, capable man over the loud, flashy one. After the meeting, as people were milling about, Clara caught my eye and gave a subtle nod toward the hallway. I excused myself from a conversation with the head of IT and followed her. She led me to a small, empty office, closing the door behind us. The air in the small room was electric. The professional masks we wore during the day were gone, and all that was left was the charged aftermath of the confrontation. That was I started, not sure how to finish. Necessary, she finished for me. Julian is a territorial animal. Sometimes you have to make it very clear where the boundaries are. You didn't have to do that, I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. You put yourself out there. So did you, she countered, taking a step closer. Walking up to me like that, asking me to dinner in front of my father and half the company. That took guts. Or stupidity, I joked, though my heart was hammering. No, she said, her voice dropping to that soft, serious tone that made my knees feel weak. Not stupidity. Confidence. The kind you can't buy with a fancy suit. We were standing very close now. I could smell the faint, clean scent of her perfume. I could see the flecks of gold in her dark brown eyes. The carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart were crumbling, turning to dust under her intense, unwavering gaze. She was the one who broke the silence. Always direct, always perceptive. Leo, she said, her voice barely a whisper. What is this? What are we doing? It was the question. The one Sarah had never asked, because she thought she already knew the answer. The one no one had bothered to ask for years. My caution, the familiar, comfortable coat I had worn for so long, screamed at me to be careful, to hedge, to retreat. But I looked into her eyes, and I saw not judgment, but genuine curiosity. I saw the woman who had fought for me when I wouldn't fight for myself. I saw the woman who saw my quietness not as a flaw, but as a strength. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't want to be careful. I wanted to be honest. I don't know what this is, I said, my voice raw with sincerity. But I know what I want it to be. I took a breath, the words tumbling out before my fear could stop them. It's not about the money, Clara. It's not about the promotion. It's you. It's the way you look at the world, like it's a puzzle you're determined to solve. It's the way you fought for me, this stranger in the margins of your reports. You didn't just see a problem on a spreadsheet. You saw a person. For years, I felt like I was speaking a language no one else understood. And then you came along, and you were fluent. Her eyes, which had been so sharp and analytical, softened. A beautiful, breathtaking vulnerability bloomed on her face. Now, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I couldn't stop myself. I reached out, my hand cupping her cheek. Her skin was soft, warm. She leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering shut for a fraction of a second. It was an act of trust, an act of surrender. I'm not looking for a live broadcast, I said, the words echoing Sarah's from a lifetime ago. I'm not looking for chaos. I'm just looking for someone who wants to watch the same show. She opened her eyes, and they were shining. And what show is that? She whispered. This one, I said, and then I closed the small distance between us and kissed her. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss like in the movies. It was quiet. It was tentative at first, a question asked and answered in the soft press of lips. It was a kiss that tasted of coffee and courage and the breathtaking relief of being truly, finally understood. Her arms went around my neck, and she deepened the kiss. And in that moment, in that small, borrowed office, my old life ended and a new one began. It was a world of her, a world of us. It was a world I wanted to build, to protect, to live in. It was a world that felt for the first time in a very long time like home. Our first real date, as we later called it, happened the following Saturday. There was a silent, mutual understanding that it wouldn't be at a place like Franco's. That was for business, for transactions, for beginnings shrouded in mystery. This needed to be something else. I have a proposition for you, she'd said on the phone Friday evening, and I could hear the smile in her voice. It involves manual labor, potential frustration, and a complete lack of checked tablecloths. You had me at manual labor, I replied, leaning against my kitchen counter. What am I building? A bookshelf, she said. A very large, very Swedish, and very intimidatingly flat-packed bookshelf that has been mocking me from its box for 2 weeks. And so, Saturday afternoon found me in Clara's apartment. It was nothing like I'd expected. The office shark, the Wharton MBA, lived in a space that was surprisingly warm and eclectic. The walls were lined with books, real books, stacked on the floor, overflowing from temporary shelves. There were art prints leaning against the walls, waiting to be hung. It was a space in progress, a space with potential. It was, I realized, a lot like her. She was dressed in old jeans and a faded university sweatshirt, a smudge of dust already on her cheek. She looked younger, more relaxed, and impossibly more beautiful than she did in her power suits. "This is it," she said, gesturing to a massive, flat cardboard box that took up most of her living room floor. The Bjornhall. The instructions appeared to be written in a combination of pictograms and existential dread. I knelt and examined the diagram, which featured a series of cheerful but unhelpful stick figures. "Ah, I see the problem," I said gravely. "You're supposed to have a cartoonishly large smile while assembling this. That's step 1 inch." She laughed, a full, easy sound that echoed in the sparsely furnished room. I knew I was missing something. I thought my MBA would have prepared me for this, but I see now I should have minored in Allen wrenches. We spent the next 4 hours on the floor, surrounded by wooden planks, tiny screws, and those damnable little wooden dowels. It should have been frustrating. It was, by all objective measures, a terrible date idea. But it was perfect. We worked together, a seamless, unspoken partnership. I would decipher the cryptic instructions. She would find the corresponding parts. I would hold the heavy pieces in place. She would drive the screws with a determined focus that I found ridiculously attractive. We talked. We talked about everything and nothing. She told me about growing up as the boss's daughter, the constant pressure to prove she was more than just her last name. I found myself telling her about Sarah, something I hadn't talked about with anyone, not even Marcus. I didn't paint Sarah as a villain. I just explained. She wanted a different kind of life, I said, tightening a cam lock with a practiced twist. She saw my consistency as stagnation. She needed someone who would surprise her with a trip to Paris. I was the guy who surprised her by having already replaced the furnace filter. Clara was quiet for a moment, carefully sorting a pile of screws. "There's nothing wrong with replacing the furnace filter," she said softly. "Someone has to make sure the air is breathable. Someone has to keep the whole house from breaking down. Not everyone is built for Paris. Some people are built to make home a place worth coming back to." I stopped what I was doing and just looked at her. Her head was bent over her task, her dark hair falling over her face. In that one simple statement, she had reframed my biggest insecurity. She hadn't just excused my nature, she had celebrated it. She had seen the function in the form, the love in the logistics. She must have felt my gaze because she looked up. "What?" she asked, a small, self-conscious smile on her face. "Nothing," I said, my voice thick. "Just thank you." Later, with the massive bookshelf standing tall and proud against her living room wall, we ordered pizza and sat on the floor, using the empty box as a table. We were tired, a little sore, and covered in a fine layer of sawdust. I had never felt more comfortable. "Now for the real work," she said, gesturing to the stacks of books. She picked up a worn paperback copy of 100 Years of Solitude. "This is my litmus test." The first book on the new shelf. A classic, I noted. "It's about family and madness, and the inescapable pull of the past," she said, her expression thoughtful. "My father gave it to me when I went to college. He said, 'Know where you come from, but don't be afraid to write your own ending.'" She told me about her mother, who had passed away when Clara was a teenager. She was a literature professor, a woman who had filled their home with stories and a fierce love of language. I began to understand where Clara's precision with words came from, her ability to see the narrative hidden in the numbers. I told her about my own family, a loud, loving, chaotic bunch who ran a small hardware store in a town a few hours away. I was the quiet one, the organizer, the one who could always find the right-sized washer in a bin full of thousands. "So it's in your blood," she said, smiling. "The instinct to fix things, to make them fit." "I guess so," I admitted. It just took me a while to realize it wasn't a flaw. "It was never a flaw," she said, her voice firm. She reached across the pizza box and took my hand. Her fingers laced with mine, a perfect fit. It was just waiting for the right problem to solve. The weeks that followed were a study in integration. Our lives began to merge in small, quiet ways. My good coffee mug, the one with the perfect weight and handle, found a permanent home on a hook in her kitchen. She started leaving her favorite brand of tea in my cupboard. I spent a Sunday afternoon helping her hang her art, turning her apartment from a space with potential into a home. She started showing up at the warehouse on Friday afternoons with 2 coffees, and we'd sit in my cluttered office for 20 minutes, a small, sacred island of peace before the weekend. My team, who were initially wary of the boss's daughter, quickly grew to adore her. She didn't talk down to them. She listened. She asked them about their families, about their work, remembering the names I'd once told her. She saw them, just as she had seen me. Julian, predictably, had self-destructed. After the public humiliation at the meeting, his sales numbers had taken a nosedive. His arrogance, once seen as confidence, was now viewed as a liability. He tried to complain to Mr. Maxwell about Clara's unprofessional relationship with me, a move that backfired spectacularly. As Clara later told me, her father had looked him dead in the eye and said, "My daughter has better business instincts than you will ever have. And Leo Maxwell has generated more real value for this company in the last 6 months than your entire year's commission. If you have a problem with either of them, the problem is yours." Julian resigned a week later. One evening, I came over to her apartment to find her father there, Mr. Maxwell, in the flesh, sitting in her armchair, nursing a whiskey. My blood ran cold. "Leo," Clara said, her expression carefully neutral as she took my coat. My father stopped by. Mr. Maxwell stood up. He was a tall man, built like the retired football player he was, and his stare was just as intense as his daughter's. "Leo," he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't extend a hand. "Mr. Maxwell," I said, my own voice steady. "I would not be intimidated. Not anymore." "My daughter tells me you're a miracle worker," he said, his eyes boring into mine. "That you can take a broken-down system and make it sing." "I just like things to be efficient, sir," I replied. He grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. He looked from me to his daughter, who was watching us with a hawk-like intensity. A long, heavy silence stretched out. Then he did something that surprised me. He smiled. It was a small, grudging smile, but it was genuine. "My wife, Clara's mother, she was like that," he said, his voice suddenly softer. "She could find the one misplaced comma in a 50-page document. She always said that details weren't just details. They were the whole story." He looked at me again, his appraisal finally complete. "You see the details, son? That's good." He picked up his coat. "I'm heading out," he announced. He walked over to Clara and kissed her on the forehead. Then he turned to me. "You take care of my girl, Leo." "Yes, sir," I said. "And Leo," he added, pausing at the door, "call me Frank." After he left, Clara collapsed onto the sofa, letting out a breath she seemed to have been holding for an hour. "Well," she said, a shaky laugh in her voice. "I think that went well. You didn't even check your teeth." I sat down next to her, pulling her into my arms. She melted against me, her head resting on my shoulder. We sat there in silence for a long time, the only sound the ticking of the clock on her new bookshelf. It was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by 2 people who no longer needed words to understand each other. "I love you," I said into her hair. The words weren't planned. They just came out. They were a fact, like gravity, like the certainty of a well-packed pallet. She went still in my arms. She lifted her head and looked at me, her eyes wide and searching. "What did you say?" "I love you." I repeated, my heart in my throat. "I love you because you see the details. I love you because you fight for what's right, even when it's hard. I love you because you make me feel like the best version of myself, not a version I need to apologize for." Tears welled in her eyes, and she smiled, a radiant, beautiful smile that could have powered a small city. "Took you long enough, Director of Operations," she whispered. "I love you too." She leaned in and kissed me, and this kiss was different from all the others. It wasn't a question or a statement or a confession. It was a promise. It was the satisfying click of the last piece of a puzzle falling into place. It was the quiet, unshakable certainty of home. 2 years later, the light from the laptop cast a soft blue glow across my face. I was sitting on the sofa in our apartment, no longer hers, but ours doing a final check of the quarterly numbers before submitting them. The Director of Operations. It was a title I had grown into a role I found I was uniquely suited for. Under my and Clara's joint guidance, the company was thriving. We had streamlined everything from payroll to packing, creating a place that was not only more profitable, but a better place to work. I scrolled down to my own pay statement, a force of habit I'd never quite shaken. Federal tax, state tax, 401k contribution, now significantly larger. Health insurance. The numbers were all correct, all perfectly in order. Boringly, beautifully predictable. A pair of arms slipped around my neck from behind, and I felt a soft kiss on the top of my head. The clean, familiar scent of her shampoo filled my senses. "Still checking my work?" Clara murmured, her chin resting on my shoulder as she peered at the screen. "Just making sure you haven't been secretly docking my pay as revenge," I joked, closing the laptop and turning to face her. She was in her pajamas, her hair in a messy bun, and she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The sharp edges she'd worn like armor in the beginning had softened, replaced by a deep, abiding contentment that radiated from her. The intensity was still there, but now it was focused on me, on us, on the life we were building. "Never," she said, her expression turning serious. She tapped the ring on my left hand, a simple, unadorned platinum band that matched the one on her own. "You're my most valuable asset. I'm all about retention." I laughed, pulling her down onto my lap. She settled against me with a comfortable sigh, her body a perfect fit against mine. The apartment was quiet, the city a distant hum outside our window. On the wall, the Bjornhall bookshelf stood, now filled to capacity. It was a monument to our beginning, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most romantic thing you can do is build something together. We had gotten married 6 months ago, a small ceremony with just our families and a few close friends, including a tearful Marcus who served as my best man. Frank had walked her down the aisle, his gruff face filled with a pride so fierce it was almost painful to look at. He'd shaken my hand afterward, his grip firm, and whispered, "Good work, son." It was the highest praise he could give. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, her fingers tracing the line of my jaw. "Just everything," I said, my voice quiet. "I was thinking about a woman named Sarah who told me I was too safe. I was thinking about a guy named Julian who thought I was the help. I was thinking about a man who was so afraid of being seen as boring that he almost made himself invisible." I looked into her eyes, the dark, intelligent eyes that had seen me from the very beginning. "For most of my life," I continued, my voice thick with emotion, "I thought that to be safe I had to be unseen. I built walls and routines to protect myself. But the truth is, I was never safe. I was just hiding." I reached up and cupped her cheek, my thumb stroking her soft skin. "Being with you, being truly seen by you, for exactly who I am, that's the safest I have ever felt." A single tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She just smiled, a smile of such profound love and understanding that it took my breath away. "Welcome home, Eo," she whispered. And I finally truly was. Have you ever had someone see a quality in you that everyone else, including yourself, viewed as a weakness? That one person who looked at your quietness and saw strength, or saw your sensitivity and called it perception. It's a powerful moment, isn't it? The moment of being truly, fundamentally understood. It can change everything. Tell me your story in the comments. I'd love to read it. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.